My name is Madeline Carter, and when I stepped onto the stage to give my graduation speech, I knew my words were about to reshape everything. Not just the way people looked at me, but the way my own parents would have to see me from that day forward. What should have been a day of quiet celebration became the moment I took back the narrative they had written without me. The auditorium buzzed with proud parents, camera flashes, and muffled cheers. But in that sea of joy, my heart beat with something else entirely. Not bitterness, no, not anymore. What pulsed through me was clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes after years of being told you were second place in your own family. Charles and Helen Carter raised us in a modest home in suburban Georgia. From the outside, we were picture perfect. A well-manicured lawn, holiday photos by the fireplace, polite dinner conversations. But behind that polished image, a truth simmered quietly and painfully for years. My younger sister Savannah was the child they invested in. The one they bet everything on. I was the other one. The one who learned early how to keep her chin up while receiving less. Growing up, I convinced myself that the inequality I felt was just in my head. That maybe Savannah simply needed more. Or that I was being too sensitive. But the truth found me in sharper moments. When she received private music lessons while I was told to entertain myself with library books. When her field trips were funded and mine, too expensive this month. The injustice didn't scream, it whispered, and I spent years learning to live in the silence of it. Until the day we both got into Westfield University. It should have been a victory for the whole family. A sign that both daughters were moving forward. But it was that moment, around the dinner table, that my parents made a choice so deliberate and final that it severed something inside me. They would pay for Savannah's education completely. And they would pay nothing for mine. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would go anyway. I would rise anyway. And one day, they would be forced to see everything they had refused to believe. My parents were not cruel people in the traditional sense. They didn't yell, they didn't hit, they didn't abandon us physically. Their neglect came in more refined forms. In choices. In tone. In what they gave freely and what they withheld. My father, Charles, was a regional sales manager who believed every decision should yield return on investment. My mother, Helen, taught literature at the local high school, romantic about characters in books but strangely detached from the real ones in her home. Savannah, 2 years younger, was a magnetic child. Blonde curls, loud laugh, the kind of kid adults adored. She had a gift for performance, for absorbing praise like sunlight, and for crafting answers people wanted to hear. I was quiet, methodical, curious in a way that unnerved my parents. I asked too many questions and didn't smile enough. As children, the difference between us seemed small. By middle school, it became a wall. Savannah got ballet lessons, a new bike, a school trip to New York. I got hand-me-downs, used books, and a savings account that no one ever contributed to. When I won a statewide math competition, my mother nodded absently and reminded me to clear the dishwasher. When Savannah received a participation ribbon for a drama workshop, she got cake and balloons. At school, I started staying late, not for activities, but for the silence of empty classrooms. I'd sit in the library and read business books while Savannah practiced her monologues with a drama coach Dad had hired. Teachers noticed my potential. Mrs. Langston, my 8th grade teacher, once wrote on my report card, "Madeline leads with quiet brilliance." My parents never mentioned it. When Savannah wrote a poem about butterflies and read it at the Spring Festival, they framed it. Savannah's birthdays were themed events with party planners and Instagram-worthy cakes. Mine were small dinners with the 4 of us and a generic card signed, "Love, Mom and Dad." At 15, I got a job at a local bookstore to save for college, assuming I'd need to. When Savannah turned 15, my parents gave her a car. That was the first time I remember something inside me shifting. Not just sadness, but awareness. I realized they didn't see us the same way, and maybe never had. I tried harder. I brought home perfect report cards, entered every competition I could find. Built up a resume that admissions counselors would later marvel at. But nothing changed at home. They never looked at me the way they looked at her. My mother once said, "Savannah's just easier to love. She brings energy into a room." I was standing right there. My father said, "You're very capable, Madeline. We never worry about you. That's a good thing." But it didn't feel good. It felt like being invisible. I stopped expecting anything from them. I learned to become my own advocate. I applied for scholarships behind closed doors, researched grants alone, worked weekends and late nights to pad my savings. I thought maybe, if I worked hard enough, I could eventually earn the thing they kept giving Savannah so freely, belief. But nothing prepared me for the dinner when they decided who deserved a future and who could fend for herself. That moment didn't just reveal their priorities, it crystallized a lifetime of quiet rejection. The night both of our acceptance letters arrived should have been one of celebration. One of those rare evenings where everything aligns and the future opens wide. Savannah walked through the front door waving her envelope like it was a trophy. I already knew I had been accepted. I had opened mine in the quiet of my room, sitting on the edge of my bed with shaking hands and eyes brimming with hope. Westfield University. Full acceptance into the business analytics program. I carried the letter downstairs and placed it on the table. I got in, I said, trying to sound casual. My father looked up from his laptop just long enough to offer a brief nod. "That's great, Maddie," he said before returning to his email. My mother didn't even glance at the letter. But when Savannah squealed and read her acceptance out loud, communications major, same university, their entire posture changed. My father stood up, smiling, hugging her tightly. My mother beamed and pulled out the sparkling cider. That was the first celebration. That was the one that counted. I sat there with a polite smile. My letter folded neatly beside my plate, untouched. 2 weeks later, we had dinner as a family, a rare occasion when everyone was home and seated without distractions. The air was expectant. My father cleared his throat and looked directly at Savannah. "We've been saving for your education since you were little," he began. My chest tightened, but I told myself maybe they meant both of us. Maybe they had plans for me too. "We want you to have the freedom to focus on your studies, not worry about money." He continued, "We'll cover tuition, room, board, everything." Savannah gasped, jumped from her seat to hug them both. I clapped softly, even smiled, because I didn't know what else to do. Then I asked the question I wasn't sure I wanted answered. "What about me?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My father didn't meet my eyes. My mother reached for her water glass. "Madeline," she said slowly, as if choosing her words carefully, "we had to make a decision. And we believe Savannah has a clearer path. Media is something you can build a real career around." I stared at them in disbelief. "And business isn't?" My father finally looked at me. "You're smart, Maddie, we know that. But you're always trying different things. You're not stable. Savannah is focused. She's got the charisma, the drive. She's who we feel confident investing in." That word, investing, as if we were stocks in a portfolio and I had failed to show the right return. "You've always been so independent," my mother added. "We figured you'd prefer to handle things your own way. Maybe community college first, or loans." The conversation continued, but I heard nothing after that. My mind was a blur of static. This wasn't just a disappointment. It was a declaration. They were saying that no matter how hard I worked, no matter what I accomplished, I would never be worthy in their eyes. Savannah watched me, silent, unsure of what to say. She had won without even trying. And I had lost despite everything. That night, I lay awake in my room staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how love could be so conditional. I thought about everything I had done to make them proud. And I realized something important. It had never been about what I did. It was about who they had already decided I was. And if that was the case, then I would stop trying to change their minds. I would go to Westfield. I would build my life on my own terms. And one day, they would have to reckon with everything they refused to see. The next morning, while Savannah and my parents chatted over pancakes, I began assembling my battle plan. It wasn't a dramatic declaration. There were no slammed doors or shouted words. Just quiet determination. I opened my laptop, created a spreadsheet, and titled it, Westfield Survival Plan. I listed every possible scholarship I had not yet applied for, every federal and private loan option, and jobs within walking distance of the campus. I already had a small fund from working at the bookstore. But it would barely cover a month of rent. I would need everything, grants, aid, work study, anything that could carry me through. I emailed my school counselor, Ms. Blanchard, and asked for recommendation letters. She replied within the hour, offering to help with every step. "You're one of the most capable students I've ever worked with," she wrote. That one sentence gave me more validation than I had ever received from my parents. In the weeks that followed, I became a machine. I filled out 30 scholarship applications. I rewrote the same personal essay a dozen times, tailoring it to each opportunity. I applied to Westfield's work-study program, requested a spot in the cheapest available housing, and reached out to every coffee shop and bookstore within 3 miles of campus. While Savannah was taken dorm shopping at a designer home goods store and given a brand new laptop, I packed my things into 2 second-hand suitcases and accepted a refurbished Chromebook donated by a local nonprofit for first-general students. My room assignment arrived, a shared apartment with 3 strangers, 40 minutes from campus, no meal plan. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't ask for help. Not even when my car started leaking coolant days before move-in. I used my own money to patch it up as best I could, loaded my belongings, and made the 2-hour drive alone. Savannah had a send-off party the night before, surrounded by friends and relatives, tearful hugs and photo collages. I watched from the staircase, unnoticed. No one asked when I was leaving. The morning I moved, my mother offered me a hug and a lukewarm good luck. My father reminded me to keep my car oil checked. As I drove away, the GPS cutting through the silence, I promised myself I wouldn't break. The apartment was small and outdated. The sink leaked, one of my roommates had an emotional support cat that triggered my allergies, and the walls were thin enough to hear every late-night fight next door. My room had just enough space for a mattress, a folding table, and a cracked dresser. I slept in my coat for the first 2 nights because the heat was unreliable. The coffee shop I had applied to hired me for the morning shift. I started work at 5, cleaned counters, brewed gallons of coffee, and smiled until my jaw ached. Then I changed in the bathroom and walked 40 minutes to my morning class. In between lectures, I ate peanut butter sandwiches I packed at night and studied in the library. I used the school gym to shower when the plumbing at the apartment broke. My second job came 2 weeks later at a used bookstore near campus. I worked weekends and closed the store on Sundays, sometimes not getting home until midnight. My body hurt constantly. I lost weight, missed sleep, and started measuring days in caffeine doses and assignment deadlines. But my grades never slipped. I finished every paper on time. I joined the Business Analytics Association and started volunteering for data projects. I didn't have time to think about whether I was okay. I was moving. I was surviving. I was building something. While Savannah posted photos of club events, dorm movie nights, and weekend trips, I posted nothing. There was no time for envy. Only action. Professor Ramirez noticed me in our second lecture. He asked a question about opportunity cost and I responded with an example from my own budgeting spreadsheet. He invited me to his office after class and asked about my background. I told him the truth, without resentment. Just facts. He listened carefully, then offered me a position as a research assistant on his small business resilience project. It paid a little, but more than that, it offered flexibility, mentorship, and something I hadn't had in a long time, respect. He said, "You remind me of someone who built herself from nothing. She now runs her own firm. You're on that track. Don't forget it." That was the first time someone with power looked at me and saw more than effort. They saw potential, and that changed everything. Late at night, after my shifts, I started building a small business offering virtual assistant services to overwhelmed entrepreneurs. Using what I learned in class and from my job, I designed my own packages, built a website, and began contacting potential clients. One said yes, then another. By the end of my freshman year, I was working 2 jobs, managing 3 clients, maintaining a perfect GPA, and slowly, painfully, carving out a life that had no room for pity. I was not doing fine. I was doing extraordinary. No one knew it yet. But I did. And I was not going to stop. Sophomore year began with 2 very different realities playing out in parallel. Savannah moved into a freshly renovated dorm suite, decorated in soft pink and gold, with matching furniture our parents had bought from an interior design catalog. Her Instagram exploded with photos of welcome week parties, tailgates, and rooftop brunches with hashtags like #CollegeDream and #BlessedLife. Every post received dozens of comments from extended family praising her beauty. Her ambition, her spark. My life, by contrast, remained invisible. I lived off campus in a basement apartment with unreliable heating and one window that looked directly into an alleyway. My meals were mostly rice, canned beans, and the occasional free bagel from the coffee shop when leftovers were allowed to be taken home. I skipped every campus social event not because I wasn't invited, but because I couldn't afford the clothes, the tickets, or the time. Savannah visited home every few weeks, always driven by our parents and greeted with gifts and hot meals. I didn't go home at all. When I missed Thanksgiving, my mother sent a group photo of the family around the table. Her message read, "We missed you, but we understand you're very busy." There was no call, no curiosity about how I was eating or where I slept. Just that cold, vague sentiment, an echo of the pattern I had known my whole life. But I was changing. I no longer felt the sting of their absence the way I once did. I had built my own structure, brick by brick. I scheduled my days to the minute, from work shifts to study blocks to client meetings. I had 3 virtual clients now, 2 of whom asked for weekly strategy calls because they trusted my insights. I was learning how to budget for taxes, how to write contracts, how to negotiate. My accounting professor gave me a recommendation to apply for an advanced finance workshop. I didn't just feel like a student. I felt like a businesswoman in training. Meanwhile, Savannah was floundering. She called once in October, her voice thin and confused. My professor gave me a D on my speech outline. I don't get it. I followed the rubric. I offered to look it over, and what I saw confirmed what I suspected. She had never been pushed to develop real skills. Her charm had always been enough. Until it wasn't. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub in the difference. But I couldn't ignore the growing distance in our capabilities. She had spent years being prepared to be seen. I had spent years being prepared to survive. One night after a double shift, I collapsed into bed and scrolled briefly through Savannah's stories. She was at a pool party, glowing in the golden hour, laughing with people I had never met. I set my phone down, staring at the ceiling. I didn't envy her. I pitied her. Because for the first time, I realized that while I had walked a brutal path, it had shaped me into someone she might never be: resilient, capable, aware. That knowledge didn't erase the pain of the past. But it gave me something solid to stand on. And when the next wave of opportunity came, I was ready. Professor Ramirez never raised his voice in class. He didn't need to. His presence commanded attention. He spoke with precision, every sentence purposeful, every pause intentional. Most students admired him from a distance, too intimidated to approach. I wasn't intimidated. I was desperate. After submitting my midterm project on resource allocation in small businesses, he called me to his office. I thought maybe I had made a mistake, that I had miscalculated something. But when I walked in, he gestured toward the chair and said, "You have a mind for systems. You see patterns where others see noise." I sat down slowly, unsure of what to say. "Thank you," I replied quietly, unsure where this was going. "How did you come up with your case analysis?" he asked. I told him the truth. That I used my own experiences. That I had helped 3 clients restructure their scheduling and customer service processes while balancing 2 jobs and a full course load. That I had no formal training beyond the last 18 months of doing everything myself. He didn't look surprised. He nodded, then opened a folder on his desk and slid it toward me. "There's a research assistant opening on my team. It focuses on resilience in small business ecosystems during economic strain. It pays, but more importantly, it will let you work flexible hours around your schedule. I think you'd be a perfect fit." For a moment, I just stared at the paper. No one had ever looked at me and said, "You'd be perfect." No one had ever seen the chaos I navigated and called it an asset. I took the folder with trembling hands and nodded. "I won't waste the opportunity." He smiled slightly. "I know you won't. That's why I chose you." That moment, quiet as it was, marked a shift. I had survived on instinct and effort. Now, someone who mattered was telling me that my survival had meaning. That my struggle had created expertise. I walked out of his office taller, lighter, and more certain than ever that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. It was late November when I heard the knock. 3 short taps, hesitant. I opened the door of my apartment and found Savannah standing there, clutching her laptop and a pile of loose papers. Her hair was unbrushed, her eyes red. I stepped aside silently, and she walked in like someone carrying invisible weight. She didn't sit, just hovered by the edge of my table. "I'm failing," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "My thesis seminar professor said my entire framework is flawed. I have 3 weeks to rebuild it or I won't graduate." I waited, unsure of what she wanted from me. An apology? A solution? Her eyes searched mine, and what I saw there wasn't pride or entitlement, it was fear. "I don't know how to fix this," she said. And I remembered, "You're the one person who never seemed to fall apart when things got hard." That line cracked something open in me. She wasn't here to compete or posture. She was here to ask for help, sincerely. I gestured to the chair. "Sit down. Let's look at what you've got." What followed was 3 hours of red ink, restructured arguments, and crash courses on research methodology. For every confused expression she gave, I offered an example from my own work. My experience assisting Professor Ramirez proved more useful than any textbook. As the hours passed, something shifted between us. She stopped talking like a sister desperate for rescue and started speaking like someone trying to understand. At one point, she looked up and asked quietly, "How do you do it all? Work, grades, your business." "I can barely manage just classes." I could have answered with sarcasm, with anger, with the years of silence I'd swallowed. But I didn't. I told her the truth. That I had worked 60-hour weeks. That I had skipped meals, walked in rain to save bus fare, cried quietly while editing marketing proposals. That I had nearly dropped out twice, but couldn't afford to fail because no one else would catch me. Savannah sat very still. "Mom and Dad always said you were doing fine," she whispered. I thought you had it all figured out." I looked at her, not with bitterness, but with the clarity of someone who had outgrown needing to be seen by the wrong eyes. "Fine is relative," I said. They never asked, and I stopped expecting them to care. It wasn't a reconciliation. Not yet. But it was the first real conversation we had ever had. And for the first time, my sister saw me, not the version our parents had described, but the one who had bled her way toward success. The email came 2 weeks before graduation. It was from my mother, short and impersonal. "We're organizing a small family dinner to celebrate Savannah's graduation. We assume you'll be busy with work but wanted to extend the invite in case your schedule allows." There was no time, no address, no warmth. Just an assumption that I wasn't part of what they considered worth celebrating. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling nothing and everything all at once. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That message told me everything I already knew. I wasn't expected. I wasn't wanted. I was invisible unless I became too loud to ignore. Savannah, to her credit, tried to change that. "You're graduating too," she said one evening while we revised her paper. "And you're speaking at the ceremony. Why aren't they including you in the celebration?" I shrugged. "Because I'm not the story they want to tell." "They're wrong," she muttered, more to herself than to me. The night of the party came. I worked a shift at the coffee shop, then spent 3 more hours finishing a presentation for one of my business clients. No one texted. No one called to ask where I was. Meanwhile, Savannah sent me a picture of the dinner table, white linens, gold plates, a cake that read "Congratulations, sweetheart." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I wasn't angry anymore. What I felt was sharper, cleaner. Purpose. Because tomorrow, I would take the stage. And tomorrow, everything they ignored, everything they dismissed, would be exposed in front of an audience they couldn't control. Not with champagne. Not with polite excuses. Not with carefully crafted silence. Savannah called later that night. "Are you ready for your speech?" I looked out the window of my apartment, at the cracked sidewalk and the empty street lamp humming quietly. I thought of the girl who had arrived here 4 years ago, scared, alone, holding together her life with duct tape and grit. "Yes," I said, steady and calm. "I've been ready for years." The ceremony hall pulsed with excitement. Thousands of families filled the seats, buzzing with pride, craning their necks for the best angle to photograph their child crossing the stage. I stood among the graduates in my black robe, my cap neatly pinned, my notes folded carefully in my pocket. But more than anything, I wore resolve like armor. The president of the university gave the opening remarks. Administrators spoke of the future, of legacy, of responsibility. I heard the words, but my mind was already on what came next. My name was called. I stepped forward, heels firm on the stage, and made my way to the podium. I caught a glimpse of my parents seated in the front row. My father in his navy suit. My mother with her wide hat and floral dress. Their expressions shifted when they saw me at the microphone. They looked at each other, confused. This was not in their program. I cleared my throat, letting the silence settle. 4 years ago, I arrived at Westfield with nothing but a vision. No financial backing, no safety net, just a belief that hard work, determination, and a refusal to surrender could carve out a path where none had been offered. The auditorium grew quiet. I worked 30 hours a week. I studied in between shifts. I lived in apartments with broken plumbing and skipped meals to afford textbooks. I took on freelance clients, started a business, built something from the ground up not because it was easy, but because it was the only way. I paused, let the weight land. There were those who believed I wouldn't make it, that I wasn't worth the investment, that someone else was the better bet, that I should take the quieter road, the cheaper road, the smaller dream. But I came anyway, and today, I stand here as your valedictorian. A collective breath shifted in the crowd. Murmurs spread. I'm the founder of a business now serving over a dozen clients across the region. I won the National Entrepreneurship Grant, secured a position at one of the most competitive consulting firms in the country. And, just yesterday, I signed my first check toward launching a scholarship for students like me. Not students with money, but students with fire. Applause began to swell, but I held up my hand to steady it. I didn't do this alone. I did it with the support of mentors who saw value where others saw risk. Friends who became family, professors who pushed me, and one extraordinary woman, my grandmother, who never once asked for proof that I was worth believing in. I looked directly at my mother then. Her face was frozen. My father shifted in his seat. I share this not for sympathy, but to remind everyone here that the person who looks like the underdog may be building an empire in silence. That success is not always nurtured, it's often clawed from the dirt. Thunderous applause rose around me. Some stood, some cried. I let it all wash over me like a tide I had been swimming toward in the dark. As I stepped back, the university president returned to the microphone. Before we continue, he said, there are a few additional acknowledgements. He turned to me with a smile. Madeline Carter is not only our valedictorian, she is also the recipient of this year's Innovation in Entrepreneurship Award, the founder of a 6-figure business, and has accepted a role at Crestbridge Consulting Group. More importantly, she accomplished all of this while fully self-funding her education. The room erupted. I turned my head and looked at my parents once more. Their faces had gone pale. After the ceremony, families flooded the courtyard with hugs, photos, and proud declarations. I stood near the fountain surrounded by professors, classmates, even strangers who had been moved by the speech. Somewhere in the distance, I saw my parents standing stiffly beneath a tree, my grandmother beside them, her chin high and her arms folded. I approached slowly, the clapping fading behind me. My father was the first to speak, his tone too casual to be real. Well, that was quite something. He said, "You've been holding out on us, Maddie." I looked at him squarely. "I've been exactly who I am this whole time. You just weren't looking." My mother tried to smile, but it faltered. "We're proud of you," she said, the words too late, too thin. Before I could respond, Savannah stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You should have asked her about her life once in the past 4 years," she said quietly, but firmly. "She's done all of this alone, while you were too busy celebrating me." The silence between us thickened. Relatives nearby turned their heads, sensing the shift. My father cleared his throat. "We just thought, you thought wrong," I cut in. "And I don't need your pride now that the world has given me something far more valuable, proof that I was always enough." My grandmother smiled beside me, pride radiating from her eyes. Savannah leaned in and whispered, "They don't get to define you anymore." I nodded, my gaze steady. They never did. I just forgot that for a while. Then, without waiting for permission or validation, I turned and walked away. The days that followed felt lighter, not because everything was resolved, but because I had stopped carrying the weight of needing their approval. I moved into a furnished apartment paid for with the business competition prize and my first consulting paycheck. I didn't tell my parents the address. I didn't need them to know where I was to know who I had become. Savannah visited often. She brought groceries once, looked around my space with wide eyes, and whispered, "This feels like success." I smiled. "It is. Mine." We talked more now. She admitted she had spent most of her life envying my composure, not realizing it was built from necessity, not choice. She asked questions about my work, about budgeting, about how to choose purpose over comfort. I saw change in her. It didn't erase the past, but it built something new between us, mutual respect. My parents reached out 2 weeks after graduation. An email. Formal, distant. They wanted to have lunch. To talk. I agreed, but on my terms. We met at a neutral cafe. The conversation was halting. My father started with logistics. How was the new job? When was my start date? My mother followed with softer attempts. How was I feeling? How had I managed everything? They didn't ask for forgiveness, not directly. But my mother did say, "We didn't know how badly we failed you." I stirred my coffee slowly. "You didn't fail to support me. You chose not to." My father flinched, but said nothing. "We want to be part of your life now," my mother said. "If you'll let us." I looked at them both. Not with anger, but with clarity. This version of me wasn't built with your help. If you want to know her, it will be a new relationship. One where pretending the past didn't happen isn't an option. They nodded, not with full understanding, but with a beginning. And that was enough for now. Because I no longer needed closure from them to move forward. I had given that to myself. Months passed. I settled into my new role at Crestbridge Consulting, where my ideas were no longer dismissed, where my voice carried weight. My digital business continued to thrive on the side, managed by a small team of students I had mentored, students who reminded me of who I once was. I created a scholarship under my grandmother's name, for students overlooked not because they lacked potential, but because they lacked privilege. The first recipient sent me a letter. She said, "You made me believe I don't need to wait for permission to become who I want to be." I framed it. It sits on my desk. Savannah started working at a nonprofit, using her voice to support education access. She said helping me woke something up in her. She was growing, slowly, genuinely. Our relationship was no longer defined by comparison. We walked side by side now, different, equal. As for my parents, they hovered at the edge of my life, present but distant, learning how to love a daughter they never understood. I gave them grace, not for them, but for myself. Because holding anger was too heavy for someone who had finally learned how to fly. On the anniversary of my graduation speech, I stood on the same campus, watching another class take their place. A few students recognized me, asked for advice, thanked me for showing them what's possible. I told them what no one had told me when I needed it most. "You are already enough. The world just has to catch up." Then I turned and walked away, the wind soft at my back. The future wide open, and my past no longer something to prove, but something I had conquered.